I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. Hey, have you heard those stats that just about everyone would love to become a social influencer? Well, at the time of this recording, I found some stats indicating 57% of Gen Zers would love to pursue this as a career option. But get this, 41% of adults would also jump at the chance. But here's my question. What if you were interested in this idea of becoming an influencer, but for whatever reason, you came to this realization that the reality of doing this was just too daunting? Or in the end, it just wasn't for you? Did it ever cross your mind that you could still work within social media in other ways? How about being a social media manager? Curious? Intrigued? If so, you gotta keep listening. I've got a great guest who is none other than Iron Mike Tyson's social media manager. Yeah, no joke. And he's here to break down his work with celebrities, influencers, executives, and podcasters. And he shares a bunch of insights that will serve anyone who has either a casual interest or a full-on wish to have this type of job. So give me a second here to more formally introduce him to you, and we can skip on into this episode. Gary Frater is the dynamic force behind the digital presence of some of the most recognized names in the world. As the celebrity brand and social media director for Cronus Communications, he's worked with high-profile figures such as Mike Tyson, Steven Crowder, Mark Sanchez, Brendan Schaub, and Gary Owen, expertly crafting and elevating their online brands. Now, Gary's expertise lies in transforming social media accounts into powerful platforms that not only amplify visibility, but also create lasting impact. His work has been featured in publications like the Epoch Times and Investment News, where his insights on topics ranging from modern relationships to brand building for men reflect his unique perspective and approach. With a blend of bold strategy and raw authenticity, Gary builds online empires, guiding his clients to dominate in their respective fields, whether through fitness, fashion, business, or personal branding. His innovative approach has made him a go-to expert for celebrities and influencers looking to turn their online presence into tangible success. So with all this noted, love to welcome you to my conversation with Gary Frater. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Gary?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we were just speaking a little bit before recording here, and, it seems like every day I'm finding in the news that like every young person wants to be a social media influencer these days. So, I think that alone just qualifies you for this program, and really excited to get into it all with you today.
Yeah. We're definitely living in the digital age right now, and it's new media versus old media. And
Oh, yeah.
new media is taking over.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I do have this first segment lined up for us today. It's something called Coloring Wikipedia. And as my listeners know, it's a segment where I just read off a definition of something related to what the guest is all about. Now, I didn't find social media director, which is a term I was after on Wikipedia, but I found it from the job site Indeed. So let me just read that off for you, and maybe you could share your thoughts after. Sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. Social media director. A social media director or social media marketing director is responsible for leading a company's social media personnel in creating and maintaining unique social media strategies. Their duties include staying up to date on social media trends, monitoring all social media profiles to determine engagement, and developing social media campaign ideas for new product launches and other events. There we go. As bare bones of a look at it as you're probably ever going to get. But based off of your experiences, your insights, your takes, what do you think of that?
I mean, that's a good very, very basic analysis. I mean, there's a lot that doesn't go into it, right? Or that description did it. It's like influencer marketing, social listening, crisis communications to some degree, right? Like social media people are usually the first people to have to deal with some sort of crisis and let the other people know about the crisis, right? So if
Right.
something comes out about a CEO, let's say, the social media, the person is the first person to get hit with that, and like when that first happened. So, I mean, it's fine for Wikipedia.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of the purpose of this segment here is to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the essence of what this job is all about. And I like that insight right out the
Right.
gate here. There is certainly so much more to it. And that's sort of like that PR sort of approach to it, being the first point of contact, essentially. Is there anything else that you'd say like wouldn't necessarily show up on a job description responsibilities worksheet, but in your opinion is absolutely like critical to doing this job well?
Yeah, I mean, at least in my career, in my position, it's talent management for sure. I mean, even when I used to work at a college, dealing with, let's say, the president of that college, right? And like, if I need content from him, they're not like people that like being on camera. In fact, anytime that they're on camera, it's usually, at least in like the news and stuff, it could be something bad that they have to deal with. So there's usually some sort of like, they're not really into that kind of stuff. So anyway, like you have to like manage talent to whatever talent, whatever that looks like, right? So, like I said, at that college, whether that's me working with Mike Tyson and having to kind of work around his personality versus a lower level influencer that feels as though they should be treated with like an A-list celebrity. So there's a lot of different parts that go into it, and sometimes they call you at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, and ask you, like, why isn't this posted or this, or, and you have to deal with that kind of stuff, right? So that's another thing. I think also dealing with hate too. I mean, dealing with negative comments, regardless of how vanilla of a, I would say, influencer or just person that you are. If you're attached to a brand and attached to, let's say, a person that you're managing social media for, especially if you have a good relationship with them, you're going to be reading a lot of negative comments not on their behalf. Sometimes that could bother you. Let's say if
Yeah.
they're a very close friend or something like that. So, or as if you develop a relationship with them. Yeah. So some stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like both those points. I mean, just considering all the different types of people that we have out there, and one of your clients that you did work with, I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more. But Mike Tyson, a very original type of individual, and yeah, you really got to get a good beat on who that person is in order to be able to work with them, and then also to project their personality and persona, online. And like you said, that's going to vary person to person. I think that must be a big point. And then that second point that you raised is, again, dealing with the hate. That's real. We all know about that these days with mental health issues and whatnot. But from the perspective of somebody who's managing the account of someone who might be going through a stretch where they're getting an excessive amount of that, and how that can rub off on the team managing the account, I think is really fascinating as well. That's something that you wouldn't necessarily consider. You just assume that's the person, the actual account owner is the one who's bearing the brunt, which I'm sure most cases is, but how that spreads out beyond that person and into, the talent management team as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you have like a bigger company, let's say, I don't know if you're managing something for Bass Pro Shop, that's just the first company that comes to mind. It's not really going to affect you. But if you're managing social media for individuals like I do, I don't really do companies. I've never really done companies. The closest thing I've done was something for a college when I was working there. But that doesn't affect a social media manager as much as it would if you have a good relationship with that person that you're managing for an individual.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of the talent themselves don't read comments, because they know that like the comments are a cesspool of just people, hating, and that's fine. And people are entitled to say what they want. You don't have to agree with it, and you don't have to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I did mention off the top, I introduced listeners to you, by way of some bio information, but maybe this might be an opportune time to hear a little bit more about the work that you do and what you're all about.
Yeah. So right now, I manage social media for very high level individuals, either celebrities, CEOs, executives, as well as podcasts. Those are kind of my specialty right there. And they're typically individuals that want to become thought leaders in their space, whether that's a tech CEO that wants to become somebody that when you think of tech, when you think of AI, when you think of whatever the industry is, you automatically think of that person because that is that go-to person, right? And so that's essentially what I do is I position these people that that want to build their brand, want to have a digital presence online as thought leaders.
And how long have you been doing this for at this point?
Around 7+ years now. So it obviously didn't start out working with high level people right away. And when I mean high level, I mean people that usually on TV or people that have either already some sort of footprint through, I don't know, being MMA fighters, UFC fighters, being athletes, as well as maybe just some people that have a high net worth, but aren't necessarily having a big digital footprint. And I started out being a personal trainer in college. And I realized that I actually enjoyed posting my content and posting workouts more than I did actually training people. And so I said, you know what, let's just double down into this. And I got one opportunity actually working for a college. I did a really good job with that. COVID hit. And then Mike Tyson's, like, it was a content studio reached out to me and they were like, hey, we need somebody to manage 5 different shows. And a lot of them are in the combat sports field. And that's something that I'm very familiar with because I don't really watch football. I don't really watch baseball or any of those other sports. Like, I'm really combat sports heavy. And so that's kind of something that I fit really perfectly into it. And that's kind of how I got my big break.
Huh, that's interesting. So you kind of like, you niched down in your interests in a sense, and that's what kind of made you attractive as a professional to some of these other companies that were looking for somebody who has that intimate knowledge of that space. Huh, that is really interesting.
Yeah. I think the fact that I have a lot of interests really does help. Like, it really does. Like, I have a lot of interests in tech, right? Like, I'm really into AI and I'm really into knowing how AI can leverage social media. And so that's why I got some clients in AI. I'm really into, let's say, investments in stocks, and I'm really into MMA and combat sports. And so it's kind of just so happens that I have all these interests and clients just kind of naturally fit into that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily have a client that's into scuba diving, right? Because that doesn't even fit with my brand. Like, I'm not really into that kind of stuff. So whatever I find that I personally am genuinely interested in is actually when the client is going to see the best results, because there's just synergy there's a good energy.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Now, I like that insight there as well. I would like to step into another segment here, a day in the life, and maybe you could get a look at what it's like managing accounts for some of these influencers, for, some top executives. What goes into that? What does it look like?
So basically what we do very simply is we meet once a week with the CEO, the executive, that person that we're managing content for, and we do an interview style, kind of like we're having now. We do an interview style kind of questionnaire for an hour, and we do a deep dive into your industry. Let's say you're a tech CEO. We'll ask you about OpenAI potentially going public. We'll ask you about Elon Musk coming out with, building a supercluster in 19 days. We'll do a deep dive into your industry, as well as, what's going on, as well as what are some of the unique things that you have to offer, right? What is your product? What is the company that you're part of? What is that unique value proposition that you're bringing to the table? And so we'll take all of that and it'll be filmed on Riverside. And basically, Riverside is a great platform for like podcasting, essentially, virtually. And then we'll take that footage, we'll cut it into, let's say, 7 clips. And there you go. And then we'll put it on various platforms, on TikTok, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. And since all of these platforms are pushing short form content, that's exactly, like, we're at the forefront of that. And so we have a team of great video editors, designers that are basically ready to take that content and make it as engaging as possible. And then we strategically place it based on what news is coming out and when it's coming out, right? So for example, something that a little bit more evergreen, maybe like a product push that you're pushing out, could come at the end of the week, maybe on a Friday. If something like Elon Musk said something and we want to get your reaction, we're going to post that on Monday, like as soon as possible. And so, yeah, that's exactly what we do. And that is the best way to get as much content as possible from the CEO, the executive that we're working with, in a minimal amount of time.
Okay. And I'd imagine that approach is similar when you're working with an influencer or public figure as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously athletes are a little bit different, right? Because you have to, like, maybe go to them and shoot content with them. It really just depends. But a lot of people are really into starting podcasts. And that is the easiest way to get content from somebody. And that's also the best way to kind of get to know somebody as well, right? So I think anybody watching this show right now is going to get a good understanding of both parties, myself and you. And I think that is the best way to get content, is to start a podcast. Because if you prioritize long form content, then you're going to be able to chop it up into clips, as opposed to shooting short form content and then trying to, I don't know, go out there and film something long form.
Yeah, there it is. This kind of leads me into another question I have in yet another segment of Q&A Discovery. You can kind of continue this back and forth. And I'm guessing here that, like, The approach that you employ right now is probably a lot different than what it was 7 years ago when you entered into all of this. Like just the nature of social media and how much it has been changing has probably shifted your approach in how you go about your work. And I'd like to learn a little bit more about, how quickly the changes that we're seeing impact the way that alter the way that you handle your work responsibilities.
Right. So basically for me, one thing I'm very happy about is that I no longer feel I have to convince people of the importance of social media. Even some of the people that are in my town and they run their own business. Before, like a few years ago, they would be like, "Hey, do I even need to be on?" Like they wouldn't even think about doing social media. It's like a luxury. And now it's something that everybody needs to do, like including business owners, including CEOs and all these people. So that's one way it's changed, right? Just from the forefront of being like, "Hey, this is the importance of it." Now it's like people understand the importance of it. So now it's, what are the little things that we can do to elevate? The biggest difference now, just from a social media perspective, is that the space has switched over to short form content, right? Like we talked about, like every platform is prioritizing short form content, as opposed to when I started a few years ago. I was managing for a little bit of a lower level influencer, maybe with 100 to 200,000 followers. Platforms we would focus on would be Instagram, and Instagram was pushing a lot of carousels, and it didn't have reels at that point. So it had video, but it didn't have reels, which are great for discoverability. But like for that particular influencer, we were doing a lot of carousel posts and making it very educational and stuff like that. And now, you could take that same information and basically make a 30-second clip out of it. And that is much more shareable, at least on Instagram now.
This other question here, and kind of like to add on to this, with all these trends constantly evolving, whether they're coming from, say, TikTok and then it's, coming over into Instagram or elsewhere, YouTube, what is it like keeping up with all of this and trying to, one, keep yourself informed, and then two, trying to get, your clients on board with some of these changes as well? Might require your clients to make changes in terms of how they're creating content or how they're communicating content. And for certain individuals, that might be easy. It might be more challenging for others. I mean, what is that element like?
So this is interesting. So one of the biggest differences, or one of the biggest challenges I've noticed, is that on social media, negativity does sell, and you can still use negativity and push a positive solution. Does that make sense? So for example, if I'm training a coach, right, and he tells you, here are 3 ways to lose weight, that is really not as effective as saying, hey, you're going to be overweight if you don't stop doing these 3 things. And then you provide the solution. So that's something that I think a lot of clients that at least I've worked with, regardless of what position they're at, they need to start out with that negative. And I think a lot of people are like, whoa, I don't want to put negativity out there on social media. I'm like, but you don't understand. Taking a position, and it doesn't mean that you're negative as a person. It just means that you start out with a problem first and hit those pain points, and then you provide your solution. And that's going to be much more effective for you ultimately. And I guess a lot of people aren't there yet, or at least they maybe it takes a little while for me to explain that to them first. So that's one thing. But a lot of different content styles are also, are important. Like, for example, people like watching and reacting to other people's videos, right? And so, for example, if somebody's saying something on social media advice that I disagree with, I can now watch that video, play the video on screen, and then give my own thoughts on it and react to it. So stuff like that. I think that there's a lot of different things that people can kind of try out. But again, it's a period of trial and error, and some people gravitate towards one content over the other. But to answer your question, as like the ever-changing field, one of the ways that I stay on top of things is follow big creators, small creators. Small creators are actually the ones innovating even more than the big creators, because a lot of them are niche specific and they just haven't had their big break yet. They're on their way, and that's really cool. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be in social media, and I love the industry that I'm in, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe this is going to like show my age a little bit here, but like, does this ever lead to like a feeling of burnout? Like, do you ever get tired by all of this? Like just constant churning? Or is it something like I can sense the passion is definitely coming like from you? Like I can tell there's an interest there on your side, but also too, like even if you have this strong interest and it's just constant, does that ever sort of wear you down?
It depends on the industry. So I used to work in politics, and that was something a little bit exhausting for me. Like that is something that, especially when you're managing social media for influencers that are political figures, regardless of the side, it's exhausting. That's one industry, absolutely. The MMA and combat sports industry, not really, because it's not as annoying to me. So I think to answer your question, I think it depends on the industry. But overall, I'm pretty grateful for what I do. Like I could be, coal mining somewhere or, doing something else that I'm not like that requires a lot of physical labor and it requires a lot more of me. And so I'm really grateful. So I
Yeah.
try to remind myself of that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, got it. There's another question here as well. You've touched on this to a degree, but like I'd like you to maybe compare and contrast a little bit what it's like managing accounts, say for an influencer or a public figure versus a top brand versus, say, an executive.
So it really depends on the risk management. Risk management meaning like what can you get away with, right? So with an influencer, they're a lot more likely to be more polarizing. And so typically the more polarizing you are, the faster you're going to grow, right? Because at the end of the day, content platforms prioritize conversations, they prioritize comments, shares, all that kind of stuff. So that's one way. And you're also looking at brand deals for these people, for these influencers. For an executive and a CEO, they're actually more B2B, right? And they're trying to position themselves as thought leaders. And I guess the copy is different, right? With the captions, it's a lot more like you're going to need to do a lot more research and there's going to be a lot more info that kind of goes like it's just a higher level of interacting, to put it that way. And then obviously the risk management, right? There's stuff that you can say, there's stuff that you can't say. With a lot of influencers, there's no real, you're not beholden to investors, for example. So you can get away with a lot more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And as far as brands, I typically don't manage stuff for brands as a whole. I'll manage stuff for the CEO of that brand.
Is there any particular reason
So
why?
yeah, I'm just not as big of a fan of it. I'll be honest. It's just not something I really enjoy. Like I enjoy working one on one with people. I enjoy getting to know people very well. I enjoy having in depth conversations and getting to know somebody behind the screen or what they're like in their life, so that I can pull those little moments and say, hey, you need to talk about this. You should talk about this. And one thing that I've kind of realized is that if you're a specialist, I guess if you do everything, you ultimately don't really do anything. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, yeah.
basically, I specialize in social media management for high profile people. I don't work with small businesses. I don't work with big brands. I work with individuals. And that is kind of where I've positioned myself into. But that being said, as far as like the closest thing to a brand I'll work with is a podcast. But again, that's usually run by an individual behind all of that.
Got it. Yeah, it makes sense. I think there's another question I've been burning to ask. Part of your history and part of what's made you quite successful is Mike Tyson managing that account
Yeah.
for quite some time, and I'm sure listeners would love to hear a little bit about that. What was that experience like?
It was incredible. I mean, I got to be Mike Tyson's right hand man. I went from graduating high school with a 2.1 GPA to barely getting into college and figuring out all of that. And then I kind of came to this massive realization of like, this is what I want to do with my life. And then going from that moment to then a year and a half later with COVID hitting to then a few months later being Mike Tyson's right hand man and being on the set of Hot Boxing with Kevin Hart and with YG and with all these boxers and celebrities and Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's massive in the fight space globally. He has more followers than the president of any country, really, on social platforms. So, like stuff like that is really, really cool. Getting to learn from Mike Tyson, being right there on the podcast. I also knew it was a career grab. There's jobs that are money grabs, and there's jobs that are career grabs, right? You might not get paid the most, but if you do this right, you'll go anywhere. You can go anywhere. And so that's kind of what happened with me is I said, you know what? I'm 24 years old, living in Los Angeles. I used to dream about being in LA, and I'm going to make the most out of this opportunity. And I did. And, then I just went off and did it all on my own.
Yeah, there you go. Unreal. Must have been quite the experience. I can only imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
in
awesome.
terms of like you maybe just hinted at this right now, what are some of the rewards of your work? Obviously, like what you just outlined there kind of speaks to that point. But what would you say are some other rewards that you've experienced along the way, or you expect to come your way later on?
I got to be in rooms that people would pay lots and lots of money for. Like I got to be, and that's something that like is crazy to me because I come from Greenwich, Connecticut, which is a wealthy place, but it's out of the way from like any of the entertainment space and all that kind of stuff. And my friends in my hometown that stuff doesn't really happen like that. And so being in rooms and going from somebody that was lost as a kid growing up to now like surrounded by all these athletes and celebrities and people that are high net worth individuals, it puts you at a different level now that you have to operate at, right? You see what's possible out there. You see the opportunities that are in front of you, and you realize I just have to just grab everything with two hands and just make the most out of this situation. So I think that's kind of like put myself, but also with luck or the universe, God, whoever it is, put me in that room. And I mean, that was one of the biggest blessings that could have ever happened, is because I learned a lot just in terms of content. I learned a lot how to deal with crises and negative situations and people trying to backstab you and take money, like just the stuff that nobody gets to see, right? Like behind the scenes. I also got to realize that a lot of these people are just normal people. And so what that taught me is that, yes, these people are really famous and they've achieved a lot, but at the end of the day, they're still human. And I'm not sure if that's the answer that you're looking for, but that's kind of stuff that I got to experience that now I just take with me, is that whenever somebody's like, oh man, it must be so cool to be that celebrity, or it must be so, I'm like, that behind that screen is just a real human being that deals with the same emotions that you do. And so what that shows me is that a guy like Jake Paul was able to achieve all the things that he was able to achieve. So there's no reason why I can't do that. And I understand that he's a real human. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah,
So,
completely. Like that's exactly what I was after there, kind of looking behind the curtain and
yeah,
the obvious rewards are there, kind of what you were explaining in the previous question, but like what you just
right.
explained now, I think speaks to that point of, what can be gleaned from a career such as this. Conversely
Right.
here, what are some of the challenges? What have been some of the difficulties associated with this work?
One of the interesting parts that I'm dealing with now and navigating is being an entrepreneur, right? Building out a business. I work with Kronos Communications and also just getting clients, navigating just that whole field of entrepreneurship. That's something that is very unique to me now and different. And the advice that I would give to a younger version of myself is the same advice that I've already taken. And that's go out, make somebody a lot of money, show your value, then save up your money, and then launch your kind of your own business, or at least go out on your own in a sense. And so that's what I've done. And the difficulty now is navigating entrepreneurship, where there's no safety. It's kind of like MMA. It's kind of like a combat sport. It's kind of like a fight out there, right? Entrepreneurship in the battlefield of ideas and all and business and all that kind of stuff. So that to me is the biggest challenge. But it's cool. It's cool. Like I have a team of designers, video editors, people that rely on me. So there's challenges there. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and that would also sort of like transfer towards some of the rewards of it. Like you're putting more of yourself into it, and by doing
yeah,
so, you're reaping more rewards. Whether it's like the financial, or whether it's just like personal growth, right? You're learning different skills. You're challenging yourself in different ways that maybe you didn't think possible, and there's intrinsically there's some reward to all of that, I think, as well. So yeah, I get that.
yeah. So 6 months ago, I left a very high paying job. I moved to the Middle East with nothing, just with my brother who was working a job, a country called Cyprus. So it's basically in the Middle East, but it's basically in Europe. It's a very small island. And then basically I started over. I went out there with some savings and I said, you know what? We're going to figure out the next move of my life. And then people started to reach out. Hey, are you managing social media? Are you doing this? And then before you know it, 2 months ago, I moved back to Dallas after being 6 months out there and now have a full-fledged business and that I'm operating. So there's challenges kind of from all angles in the past year, but it's been super exciting. And like you said, though, entrepreneurship is an animal in
Oh
itself.
yeah.
So it's
Is that becoming a trend now for people like yourself who, start out with social media account management, maybe you move up, you progress to say like a director level, and then you're going out on your own? Is that becoming the trend for professionals such as yourself, or?
I mean, it's what I've seen, but I don't know if that's necessarily a trend. I think for the most part, I don't know if people have that kind of patience in terms of going out there making other people money first, because that's a long-term play. It's a long-term play, but it's a better play because now you have all these connections. I would argue that I think most people now are becoming solopreneurs. So even if they don't have a lot of experience, they're just going to go out and try to get clients that way. I'm happy I didn't do that, because then you have to learn along the way and bump your head like 9 million times in order to learn a lesson that you would have learned a lot faster working for somebody else. But that's what I think the trend is more now. I think that there's people that made maybe some money on, maybe built up a little bit of a following or something like that and said, hey, I'm going to try to, do this myself. Or they just try to pick up clients right out of college or something. So a few people have been very successful in terms of navigating the 9 to 5, the building somebody else's dream, and then going out and building their own. So I think it's half and half.
Yeah. Okay. Got one last question here in terms of, getting back to the nuts and bolts of the work that you're involved in here. I understand that part of your thing is building authenticity, with your clients,
Right.
whoever you're working with, and as well as like employing a bold strategy. Now, I'd like to learn a little bit more about like how you go about doing that. Like those two elements, are foundationally are critical to any social media account management, I would assume, right? Like principal sort of like bedrock items there. But how do you go about, building those into, the strategies that you're employing with some of your clients?
One thing is just about building a relationship with the current client that you currently have to the point where they feel like they can trust you when you're on that call with them that I mentioned earlier, when you do once a week calls with them. Like you want them to not give you the answer that is the PR friendly answer, but the actual answer. Like, what do you really think about this situation? And I think kind of creating a good, I don't want to say safe space, but I want to say a good environment. I'll put it that way, a good environment to the point where they feel comfortable enough to be honest with you, then that honesty and that energy translates to other people when you put that content out. So I think that that's something that is kind of, it's not really a strategy. It's just the way that I understand people. And that's the kind of the way that I would go about it, is creating a good environment to the point where people can feel like they can be honest with you. And then that bleeds over into the content.
Okay. And that's also kind of where this boldness comes from as well. I guess once you know that person and you know what drives them, you know how to kind of like, I don't know, approach a topic that might be
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, yeah.
controversial at points. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you know what problems to what to stay away from, what they do want to touch on, like what they're passionate about, like so there's that. I mean, once you kind of get to know somebody, that hey, let's just also double down into what they're passionate about, even if it's not being talked about now, because that passion could just very well, people resonate with passion and emotion more than they resonate with logic, right? So let's take what you're passionate about, let me continue asking you questions and really hammering that down, and then put that out there.
Yeah. Got it. All right. Well, I do have this other segment here, working our way through this episode, water cooler story segment. And, here I just ask guests and college listeners with the story related to their work. And I'm dying to hear what you got for us today, Gary.
Yeah. So one time we were at this party. It was by Money Lion. Money Lion is this big banking company. They've done a lot now. But anyway, and Mike Tyson was there. And this party was hosted at Lenny Kravitz's $50 million mansion. And they shot an episode with Brendan Schaub, who's an ex-MMA fighter, or ex-UFC fighter who does Fighter and the Kid now, and he was a stand-up comedian. Anyway, he was hosting it. Brandon Marshall was the football player, Daniel Cormier, former UFC heavyweight champion, and then Mike Tyson was there. And so I was talking to Mike Tyson, a bunch of photos from there, and I was just sitting down at this big, and it was Super Bowl night. It was Super Bowl night, and the Rams were playing in Los Angeles, so it was just perfect. And so I just remember sitting down after getting done talking to Mike, and I'm sitting by myself, and I'm overlooking the city of Los Angeles. As fireworks are going on because I think the Rams just won, and I was like, wow. I did it. I made it. Like,
Yeah.
I used to dream about being in Los Angeles. I used to have on my cell phone, I used to have a vision board or just a background screensaver when I was in 8th grade of Los Angeles, because I felt like that's where all the celebrities were. And that's where all the high profile people were, and fighters were, most importantly. And I'm a big fight fan. And so that was something to me that was like, wow, if I can make it there, like that's where I need to go. It was kind of just a chance that all my dreams kind of came true. And it was definitely the best moment of my life for sure.
Yeah, unreal. You must have just been pinching yourself. Like, is this
Yeah.
actually happening? Is this actually happening?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's a good water cooler story, but that's something that's definitely been the greatest moment of my life for sure.
100%. And it sounds like, I mean, the trajectory that you're on right now, you're probably lining up a few more of these things are going to be coming your way awfully soon by the sounds of it.
I appreciate that. Hopefully.
Yeah. All right. We're rounding the bend in this last segment, crystal ball segment. It is as it sounds. We're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And, these days in almost every industry, we're talking AI, the infiltration of AI, how it's shifting, how it's changing, how it's impacting the work of professionals and industries as a whole. Now, I'm curious here about like what you're seeing. You'd already mentioned an interest in AI and social media and whatnot. I'd be curious to see like how AI is shifting and changing the game around for professionals such as yourself.
Mm. So I work with a lot of CEOs that are very close to AI, the ones that are actually like building out either AI agents or just they're just leading the forefront of AI of this revolution, right? And so what they tell me is that AI is not going to replace you unless you can use AI to your advantage, right? So behind AI needs to be a person doing it. So in my industry, for example, Opus Pro, which is meant for cutting viral moments and clips, it's nowhere near as good as a video editor, let's say. Or, for example, AI influencers are going to come out, and that's going to be something that's very popular. I think, like, so those type of things, AI avatars, AI influencers, stuff like that is like, instead of you and me like sitting down and shooting a piece of content, like you could just shoot something once and then do either some sort of voice recording or something like that. Then the AI avatar is the one that's going to be presenting that, right? And then you don't have to do your hair, you don't have to get ready and stuff like that. So
Right on
that's,
this program, I
yeah.
had a virtual humans influencer on, like the
Oh,
creators. I had
okay.
one of the creators of this
Oh,
Tokyo-based
wow.
company that, yeah, exactly. She's one of the biggest within Asia, this AI version.
Okay.
So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And for listeners, they might want to go check out that episode if that has any interest to them. But
Yeah.
yeah, I can definitely see that. Okay.
So that, I mean, you obviously have your ChatGPT, your Claude, your Perplexity. Like, there's really cool programs and stuff like that. But again, I think that you need a human behind all that stuff. Like, I don't think that it depends, right? So, like one of my clients is using AI agents, and they're basically going to wipe out entire marketing department. Like, they automate tasks for you. But again, you need to know what to automate, right? So if I'm a social media manager and I'm like, okay, you're going to be in charge of copywriting, right? And so that AI is going to do that for me, right? That AI agent or whatever it is. Then another agent could create thumbnails or something like that. But my point is that you are at that forefront and basically gearing those AIs to do what it is that you want. I also think that a lot of solopreneurs are going to come out of this, because I think that people are going to realize that it's a lot more lucrative for them to be not W-2 employees, but like, let's say if you're a social media manager, you could take on $2,000 client here, $5,000 client here, and you could have these AI agents working for you and doing stuff on your behalf, or at least replacing what you would normally have paid somebody else for. So I think that that's kind of where the future is headed. It's an exciting time. I think I'm excited for it, and I'm all for AI. If you asked me a year ago, I would have been a little bit more nervous, but I think that I've done my best to stay on top of what's going on in AI, and I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're not going to change it. You're not going to stop it. So you got to find ways of living with it,
Yeah.
and then also like leveraging it, right? And I think like the knee jerk reaction for a lot of people is like they think like, well, AI is going to come for my job. It's going to completely replace what I'm doing. And I think this speaks to the point that you were just raising there is like AI unto itself is this tool, right? It's a tool that we can use to augment or to improve efficiencies or maybe to take on certain tasks and some responsibilities. But as you've mentioned several times, is like you still need that human element kind of overseeing it and directing it this way or that way. And I had this question here, like originally, written down here that like, are we going to approach a point in time where like bots are going to be managing social media accounts? And based off the conversations that we've had thus far, like you have these weekly check-ins with your clients, you're intimately getting to know them and building relationships with them. I just can't see that being the same type of experience or an AI bot generating enough from a person. Certainly they could do that. You could just have a bot that's like interviewing a person. We could get there, but I don't know if we're ever going to reach that point where there's like that connection where they truly know that person, or the human themselves are going to feel comfortable enough sharing all of that information with a bot. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's something
Yeah.
lost there, and that's where that human element is going to remain like integral to this whole thing. That's just kind of what I've gathered from this conversation. But what
No,
would you
I
say?
don't think you're wrong at all. I think that makes sense. I think when you're going to have a bunch of these AI influencers and AI avatars, where are people going to go? They're going to go where there's genuine connection with somebody, right? So you may not be able to create content. Like I might not be able to create content as fast as you will, but there's going to be, or vice versa, but people are still going to gravitate towards you. For example, if you are just showing up as yourself, just genuinely just grabbing an iPhone and just talking to the camera, as opposed to having an AI do it for you. So there's pros and cons. Okay. You could crank out much more content with an AI influencer or AI avatar of yourself. But what's going to ultimately social media is like kind of like I guess a storefront, but it's also like you're building a connection and building a community with people. And I think that's where the people win, right? People win when it comes to trust. That is how you buy from somebody. People need to trust you in order to buy something from you. Otherwise, they might go with somebody else, or they just may not feel like they need your product, period. So I think that's.
Yeah. I think there's also too, like just the whole messiness of like the human experience. And I think that, like it's often overlooked maybe on paper if we're like evaluating what people want, but like ultimately, like I think that's a big part of it. Like that's how you build that authenticity and that connection is that, the whole messiness. You want that experience. That's how you understand that person is real. They're going through things that, are challenging, just like just like you are or have gone through. And I think that stuff counts, and certainly within social media, like that pure, genuine connection is built on encounters like that.
Oh, I absolutely. My favorite type of people are people that just completely destroy their life at some point and they're left with nothing. They look around and they have nothing. And then they rebuild it from the ground up and come out of the ashes like a phoenix.
Yeah.
That to me is my favorite type of
It's a
people
tale
because
as old
those
as
are the people
time.
you can relate.
Yeah. We love that stuff, right? We do. Yeah. 100%. Well, this might be a nice point to draw this conversation to a close, but I've loved it from start to finish here, Gary. We've blown through it, and I know listeners are going to absolutely love it. So thanks for taking some time and joining the program today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Gary and his work, you can do so via LinkedIn. You can also find him at the PR agency he works for, Cronus Communications. And for reference, you can find all this information over at lifeasa.com. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share to show further support. You can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcast. As I mentioned off the top, head on over to YouTube. I do have that channel which hosts highlights of these audio recordings. If you do make it over there, I would love that like or subscribe. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life As A. You could literally be one listen away from finding your dream job. I'm Christopher Schoenwald, your host. Until next time, don't settle for less. Find the career you were born for.